Well, joining me now, Seth Kaplan, managing partner of Airline Weekly. Seth, with a welcome to you. What is the general aviation's community reaction to this crash and the information we've learned, confirmed and otherwise, about the pilot?
Yeah, well, people in the airline industry feel just like everybody else, shocked, obviously, and asking themselves what could have been done to prevent this, and more relevantly now, what can be done to prevent something like this in the future. And really, it comes down to two things. You know, how do you screen people so that you don't end up with somebody like this in the cockpit? And secondly, what do you do if somebody like that slips through? Now, on the second point, airlines outside the U.S. already having taken a lot of steps to try to prevent this again. You know, in the U.S., as you probably know, Alex, there was already a procedure in place where there would have been somebody else in the cockpit. Impossible, obviously, to say if that would have prevented this, but a flight attendant, for example, could have at least, tried to talk him out of it, tried to fight to open the door. On the first point, you know, we now know, obviously, in retrospect, Andreas Lubitz should not have been in the cockpit. So, you know, that doctor who was concerned about him going to work, should we have set aside, for example, privacy concerns and said, you know, a doctor like that should be able to inform an employer about somebody in a situation like that? You know, as Katie mentioned, plenty of depressed people in the world, and almost none of them would do something like this. But, you know, how do you identify that person and keep him or her from the cockpit?
Yeah, this rule of two, though, that we implement here, North American airlines have to use it, but it hasn't been implemented in Europe, although many are now jumping on board. 4 or 5 have said, we're going to do this now. Why do you think, I mean, because from a common sense standpoint, in the wake of 9/11, it's curious that they hadn't put that into effect. What's behind that?
It is, you know, and obviously we sort of have to separate out what we now know, unfortunately, based on what's happened this week, and what the thinking of things was just several days ago. And Alex, a lot of things where, you know, you kind of can't optimize for everything. I mean, for example, let's think about the fact that that very reinforced cockpit door that came into effect because of 9/11 is partly what made it so difficult in this case for, you know, the good guys, so to speak, to get into the cockpit, because that door was all about keeping the bad guys out there too. Not to say that this could have been prevented, because I mean, there were pilot murder suicides before 9/11. Those old doors were not easy to penetrate either. But yeah, absolutely, it certainly does make a lot of sense, and that's why, well, Canada's regulator already told the airlines there to do it, although Air Canada had jumped ahead and said, look, we're going to do this with or without the regulator. And the European equivalent to the FAA, it's called EASA, has so far recommended to airlines that they do this, not having yet mandated it, but that's probably forthcoming. Although, as you said, Alex, several airlines, including Lufthansa, after some of its competitors, had already implemented that on their own.
Yep. Okay. From Airline Weekly, Seth Kaplan. Thank you so much, Seth.